Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Rediscovering History. I'm your host, Maddie, and today we're diving deep into the heart of American democracy, the U.S. elections. Whether you're a political junkie, a history enthusiast, or just curious about the quirky and sometimes chaotic world of elections, this episode is for you. Over the next hour, we're going to explore some of the most fascinating, surprising, and downright unbelievable moments in U.S. election history. Now, you might be thinking, hour on elections? Really? But trust me, by the time we're done, you'll see just how much drama, intrigue, and sheer unpredictability these events have packed into our history. So grab a comfortable seat, maybe a notebook to jot down some fun facts, and let's embark on this journey together. Elections in the United States have always been more than just a simple counting of votes. They've been a reflection of the nation's changing values, a battleground for conflicting ideologies, and sometimes a mirror showing us the best and worst of what democracy can offer. From the early days when only a select few could vote to the modern era where social media can sway opinions overnight, U.S. elections have evolved in fascinating ways. Today, we'll walk through this evolution, focusing on the key elections that have left a lasting impact. We'll dig into the election of 1800, where the peaceful transfer of power was anything but assured. We'll talk about the election of 1860, which split the nation in two, leading to the Civil War. And we'll examine more recent elections, like the controversial 2000 race, where a few hanging chads in Florida determined the leader of the free world and York. But that's not all. We'll also explore how third parties have sometimes turned the political landscape upside down, how the first televised debate changed everything, and how the advent of social media has made every tweet, like, and share a potential game changer in modern elections. By the end of this podcast, you'll have a whole new appreciation for the complexity and excitement of U.S. elections. So, let's kick things off with one of the most contentious and pivotal elections in American history, the election of 1800. Our story begins in the year 1800, a time when the United States was still finding its footing as a nation. The Revolutionary War was over, but the fight for America's soul was just beginning. The election of 1800 was the first real test of the young nation's democracy, and it was a test that nearly tore the country apart. On one side, we had John Adams, the incumbent president and a member of the Federalist Party. Adams was a staunch believer in a strong central government, and he was determined to keep the young nation on the path he believed was right. On the other side was Thomas Jefferson, the vice president at the time and a leader of the Democratic Republicans. Jefferson envisioned a different America, one where the government played a smaller role and the rights of states and individuals were paramount. The political climate in 1800 was nothing short of toxic. The country was divided, with Federalists and Democratic Republicans accusing each other of being traitors to the nation. Newspapers were filled with scathing editorials, and rumors ran rampant. It was a time of intense partisanship, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. For Adams, this election was about preserving the federal government's authority and maintaining order in a country that was still very much in its infancy. For Jefferson, it was about ensuring that the American Revolution's ideals of liberty and democracy didn't get lost in the pursuit of power. Both men believed they were fighting for the future of the country, and neither was willing to back down. As the votes were counted, it became clear that this election was going to be incredibly close, but no one could have predicted just how close it would be. When all the electoral votes were tallied, something unprecedented happened. There was a tie. Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, each received 73 electoral votes, while Adams fell behind with 65. Now, this tie wasn't just an awkward situation, it was a full-blown constitutional crisis. The Constitution didn't account for what should happen if there was a tie in the Electoral College. So, the decision was thrown to the House of Representatives, where each state would cast one vote to determine the next president to enter. But the House was just as divided as the rest of the country. For days, the representatives were deadlocked, with neither Jefferson nor Burr able to secure the majority needed to win. The country was on the edge of its seat, and the tension was palpable. There were even rumors of a possible civil war if the deadlock couldn't be broken. Enter Alexander Hamilton, one of the most influential figures in American politics at the time. Despite being a Federalist, Hamilton despised Aaron Burr and believed he was a dangerous man. So, in a move that shocked many, Hamilton threw his support behind Jefferson, arguing that while he disagreed with Jefferson on many issues, he at least had principles. Burr, in Hamilton's view, had none. After 36 ballots, the deadlock was finally broken. Thanks to Hamilton's influence, Jefferson was elected as the third president of the United States, and Burr became his vice president. But the drama of the election didn't end there. The animosity between Hamilton and Burr only grew, eventually leading to their infamous duel in 1804, where Hamilton was fatally shot. The election of 1800 was a watershed moment in American history. It was the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties, proving that democracy could work, even in the face of intense division. It also led to the 12th Amendment, which changed the way presidents and vice presidents were elected, ensuring that a tie like this would never happen again. Looking back, the election of 1800 shows us just how fragile democracy can be and how important it is for leaders to put the country's interests above their own. It also reminds us that even in the most contentious of times, it's possible for the nation to come together and move forward. It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was over 200 years ago. Fast forward 60 years, and the United States was once again at a crossroads. The issue of slavery was tearing the country apart, and the upcoming election of 1860 would determine the nation's future. But before that election, there were a series of debates that would set the stage for one of the most important elections in American history, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln, a relatively unknown lawyer from Illinois, challenged the incumbent Senator Stephen A. Douglas to a series of debates as they both ran for the U.S. Senate. What followed was a series of 7 debates that captured the attention of the entire nation. These debates weren't just about winning an election, they were about defining the very soul of the country. The central issue in the Lincoln-Douglas debates was, of course, slavery. Douglas, a Democrat, supported the idea of popular sovereignty, where each state could decide for itself whether to allow slavery. Lincoln, on the other hand, argued that slavery was morally wrong and should not be allowed to expand into the new territories. But these debates were about more than just slavery. They were about the future of the United States as a unified nation. Douglas believed that the country could remain divided on the issue of slavery, that it could be both free and slave. Lincoln disagreed, famously stating in one of the debates, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free." The Lincoln-Douglas debates were unlike anything the country had seen before. Thousands of people attended the debates in person, and millions more read the transcripts in newspapers across the country. These debates elevated Lincoln's profile and made him a national figure, setting the stage for his presidential run in 1860. While Douglas won the Senate race, Lincoln won the battle of ideas. His arguments resonated with a growing number of Americans who were tired of compromise and wanted a clear stance on slavery. And when the 1860 election came around, those ideas would propel Lincoln to the presidency. The election of 1860 was one of the most significant in American history. It was the moment when the country's divisions could no longer be ignored. Lincoln's victory, with a platform that opposed the expansion of slavery, was the final straw for the Southern states. Within months of his election, several states seceded from the Union, leading to the Civil War. Lincoln's election wasn't just a political victory. It was a turning point in American history. It marked the beginning of the end for slavery in the United States and set the country on a path toward a more equal society. But it also showed the deep divisions that still existed in the nation, divisions that would take a bloody war to resolve. The Lincoln-Douglas debates in the election of 1860 remind us of the power of ideas in shaping a nation's future. They also show us the importance of leadership in times of crisis. Lincoln's vision and moral clarity helped guide the country through its darkest hour, and his legacy continues to inspire us today. As we look back on these events, we can see how far we've come and how much further we still have to go. As the United States emerged from the Civil War and the tumultuous years of Reconstruction, the election of 1876 became a flashpoint in American history. The nation was still deeply divided, not just along North-South lines, but also within the political parties themselves. The Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, was seen as a moderate reformer, while the Democratic candidate, Samuel Tilden, was a crusader against corruption. This election would test the limits of the nation's electoral system, and the outcome would hinge on a series of contested votes that nearly plunged the country into another civil war. Election night 1876 was one of the most chaotic in American history. Initial returns showed that Tilden had won the popular vote by a narrow margin, and he appeared to have secured 184 of the 185 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. Hayes had only 165 electoral votes, but in 3 southern states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, both parties claimed victory, leading to a dispute over who had actually won. With 20 electoral votes in dispute, the election was thrown into turmoil. Both parties accused each other of fraud, and the country was left in suspense as the process dragged on for months. To resolve the deadlock, Congress created a special electoral commission made up of 15 members, 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate, and 5 from the Supreme Court. The Electoral Commission was supposed to be a fair and impartial body, but it quickly became clear that it was anything but. The commission voted along strict party lines, awarding all 20 disputed electoral votes to Hayes, giving him a 1-vote victory in the Electoral College. But the controversy didn't end there. Democrats were outraged, and there were even whispers of armed rebellion. To prevent a crisis, leaders from both parties came together to negotiate what became known as the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for Democrats accepting Hayes as president, Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. The Compromise of 1877 had far-reaching consequences. It marked the end of federal efforts to protect the rights of African Americans in the South, leading to the rise of Jim Crow laws and decades of segregation and disenfranchisement. For many, it was a bitter reminder that political power often comes at the expense of justice and equality. The election of 1876 also highlighted the flaws in the U.S. electoral system and the dangers of partisan politics. It was a stark reminder that democracy is fragile and that the rule of law must be upheld, even in the face of intense political pressure. The contested election of 1876 is a cautionary tale about the perils of electoral disputes and the compromises that can undermine the principles of democracy. It's a reminder that the decisions we make in the heat of political battles can have lasting consequences for generations to come. Let's fast forward to 1960, a year that would forever change the way elections are conducted and won in the United States. The political landscape had evolved significantly since the days of Lincoln and Douglas, and technology was about to play a new and decisive role in shaping public opinion. Enter the first ever televised presidential debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. The 1960 election was already a tight race. On one side, you had Vice President Richard Nixon, a seasoned politician with years of experience under his belt. On the other, there was Senator John F. Kennedy, a relatively young and charismatic candidate who had captured the imagination of the American public. But what would set this election apart wasn't just the candidates. It was the medium through which they would reach the American people. Television was still a relatively new phenomenon in American households in 1960, but it was quickly becoming the most influential form of media. For the first time, voters could see and hear the candidates in their living rooms, making their decision based not only on what they heard, but also on what they saw. This shift would have a profound impact on the outcome of the election, and it's a factor that candidates and campaign managers have had to consider ever since. Kennedy understood the power of television. He prepared meticulously for the debate, focusing not just on his answers, but on his appearance and demeanor. Nixon, on the other hand, underestimated the importance of optics. Recovering from a recent hospital stay, he looked pale and tired, refused makeup, and wore a light-colored suit that blended into the background on the black and white television screens of the time. The contrast between the two candidates was striking. Kennedy appeared confident, youthful, and energetic, while Nixon looked uncomfortable and nervous. Their performances during the debate would become a defining moment in the election. While those who listened to the debate on the radio believed Nixon had won based on his answers, those who watched on television overwhelmingly felt that Kennedy had come out on top. This was the moment when the visual became just as important as the verbal in American politics. Kennedy's strong showing in the debate helped to solidify his image as a dynamic leader, and it gave him the momentum he needed to win the election. For Nixon, the debate was a harsh lesson in the power of television and the importance of image in modern politics. The 1960 debate wasn't just a turning point for that election. It was a watershed moment for all future campaigns. It showed that in the television age, a candidate's appearance, body language, and overall presentation could be just as important as their policies and rhetoric. It also marked the beginning of an era where media consultants, makeup artists, and television producers would play a crucial role in shaping political campaigns. In the years since that first televised debate, candidates have become increasingly savvy about the way they present themselves on screen. They practice their gestures, rehearse their answers, and work with image consultants to ensure that they come across as confident and trustworthy. The Kennedy-Nixon debate was a wake-up call for politicians, and it set the standard for how campaigns are run in the modern era. The first televised debate in 1960 is a reminder of how quickly technology can change the rules of the game. It's also a lesson in the power of perception and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. Kennedy's victory in that debate wasn't just a triumph of substance, it was a triumph of style. And it's a moment that continues to resonate in American political history. Just over a decade later, another momentous event would shake the foundations of American politics, one that would lead to the downfall of a president and forever change the public's trust in government. The Watergate scandal, which began as a minor break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters, ultimately led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon and had a profound impact on the election of 1972 and the years that followed. But to understand Watergate and its significance, we need to look back at the political climate of the early 1970s. Nixon had been elected president in 1968, promising to restore law and order in a country torn apart by the Vietnam War, civil rights protests, and social upheaval. By 1972, he was running for re-election, and his campaign was determined to secure a decisive victory. On June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. At first, the break-in seemed like a minor incident, but as journalists and investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of political espionage, dirty tricks, and illegal activities that led directly to the White House. Nixon and his aides initially tried to cover up the administration's involvement in the break-in, but their efforts only made matters worse. The cover-up unraveled over the next 2 years, thanks in large part to the relentless reporting of journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of The Washington Post, as well as the Senate Watergate Committee's investigation. Despite the brewing scandal, Nixon won the 1972 election in a landslide, defeating Democrat George McGovern by one of the largest margins in U.S. history. The Watergate scandal had not yet reached its full intensity, and many voters were unaware of the extent of the administration's involvement in the break-in and subsequent cover-up. However, the victory was short-lived. As the investigation into Watergate continued, it became clear that the Nixon administration had engaged in a widespread campaign of political espionage, harassment of opponents, and abuse of power. The release of the smoking gun, tape, an audio recording that revealed Nixon had ordered a cover-up of the break-in, was the final nail in the coffin. Faced with almost certain impeachment, Nixon resigned on August 8, 1974, becoming the only U.S. president to do so. The Watergate scandal had a lasting impact on American politics. It led to a wave of reforms designed to increase transparency and accountability in government, including new campaign finance laws and restrictions on executive power. It also deepened public cynicism and mistrust of government, a sentiment that has persisted in American politics to this day. For many, Watergate is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of a free press in holding leaders accountable. It's a scandal that has been studied, analyzed, and referenced in countless political discussions and continues to serve as a cautionary tale for future generations. Watergate was more than just a political scandal. It was a crisis of confidence in American democracy. It showed that even the most powerful leaders are not above the law, and it underscored the importance of vigilance and integrity in public life. As we look back on the election of 1972 and the events that followed, we're reminded of the fragile nature of democracy and the need for constant vigilance in protecting it. Now, let's turn to one of the most controversial and closely contested elections in recent memory, the election of 2000. This was an election that would ultimately be decided not by the voters, but by the Supreme Court, in a ruling that still sparks debate today. The contest between George W. Bush and Al Gore was not just a battle for the White House. It was a legal and political showdown that tested the limits of the American electoral system. The 2000 election was held against the backdrop of a booming economy, but also growing concerns about issues like healthcare, Social Security, and education. Both Bush and Gore presented themselves as the candidate of the future, with Bush promising to bring compassionate conservatism to the White House, and Gore focusing on the need for continuity and progress. On election night, November 7, 2000, the race was too close to call. As the evening wore on, all eyes turned to Florida, a state with 25 electoral votes that would determine the outcome. The initial results showed that Bush had won Florida by a razor-thin margin, but as the vote tallying continued, it became clear that the margin was within the range that triggered an automatic recount. What followed was a weeks-long legal and political battle over the counting of ballots in Florida. The recount process was mired in controversy, with disputes over hanging chads, dimpled chads, and the infamous butterfly ballot that led some voters to mistakenly cast their votes for third-party candidate Pat Buchanan instead of Gore. The Florida recount was eventually halted by a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court on December 12, 2000, in the case of Bush v. Gore. In a 5-4 ruling, the court ordered an end to the recount, effectively awarding Florida's electoral votes and the presidency to George W. Bush. The decision was highly controversial, with critics arguing that the court had overstepped its bounds and that the recount should have been allowed to continue. The ruling had far-reaching implications, not just for the outcome of the 2000 election, but for the American political system as a whole. It raised questions about the role of the judiciary in electoral disputes, the fairness of the Electoral College, and the integrity of the voting process. The election of 2000 exposed deep flaws in the U.S. electoral system and highlighted the challenges of conducting fair and accurate elections in a diverse and decentralized country. It also underscored the importance of every vote, as the outcome of the election hinged on just a few hundred ballots in a single state. In the years that followed, efforts were made to reform the electoral process, including the implementation of new voting technologies and procedures to prevent the kind of problems that plagued the 2000 election. But the controversy surrounding Bush v. Gore remains a potent reminder of the potential for electoral disputes to undermine public confidence in the democratic process. The election of 2000 is a stark reminder that in a democracy, the process by which we choose our leaders is just as important as the leaders themselves. It's a lesson in the importance of vigilance, fairness, and the rule of law in ensuring that every vote counts and that the will of the people is respected. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in American history, we're reminded of the fragility of democracy and the ongoing need to protect and strengthen it. As we move into the 21st century, we come to an election that not only made history, but also transformed the way political campaigns are run in the digital age. The 2008 election saw the rise of Barack Obama, who would become the first African American president of the United States. But beyond this historic milestone, the 2008 election was notable for the innovative use of digital technology and social media in political campaigning, setting the stage for the modern era of elections. The election of 2008 took place against the backdrop of an economic crisis, two ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a growing sense of frustration with the status quo. The country was ready for change, and Obama's message of hope and change resonated with millions of voters. But it wasn't just the message that made Obama's campaign successful, it was the way that message was delivered. The 2008 election was the first in which social media played a central role in shaping the outcome. Obama's campaign team recognized the potential of platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to reach voters directly, bypassing traditional media and creating a more personal connection with the electorate. They used these platforms to mobilize supporters, fundraise, and spread their message in ways that had never been done before. Obama's campaign was also groundbreaking in its use of data analytics. The campaign team collected vast amounts of data on voters, allowing them to target their messages with precision. They used this data to identify potential supporters, tailor their outreach efforts, and optimize their spending. This data-driven approach was a game changer in political campaigning, setting a new standard for how elections are won in the digital age. One of the key strategies of Obama's campaign was grassroots mobilization. The campaign empowered ordinary people to become activists, organizing events, making phone calls, and canvassing their neighborhoods. Through the use of social media and online tools, the campaign was able to harness the energy and enthusiasm of millions of volunteers, turning them into a powerful force for change. This grassroots approach helped Obama build a broad and diverse coalition of voters, including young people, minorities, and first-time voters. It also allowed the campaign to raise record amounts of money from small donors who were inspired by the candidate's message and eager to be part of the movement. As the election neared its final stages, the debates between Obama and his Republican opponent, Senator John McCain, became critical moments in the campaign. Obama's calm and confident demeanor during the debates contrasted with McCain's more aggressive style, helping to solidify Obama's image as a steady and reliable leader. The financial crisis that erupted in September 2008 also played a significant role in shaping the final weeks of the campaign, with Obama's response to the crisis reinforcing his message of change and responsible leadership. On November 4, 2008, Barack Obama was elected the 44th President of the United States, winning 365 electoral votes to McCain's 173. The election was a resounding victory, not just for Obama, but for a new way of conducting political campaigns. The strategies and technologies used in the 2008 election have become the blueprint for modern campaigns, influencing the way candidates run for office in the digital age. The election of 2008 marked a turning point in American politics. It showed the power of digital technology and social media in shaping public opinion and mobilizing voters. It also highlighted the importance of grassroots organizing and the potential of data-driven strategies to win elections. Obama's victory was a moment of profound change in American history, breaking down barriers and inspiring millions around the world. But it also set the stage for the challenges and divisions that would follow, as the country grappled with the aftermath of the financial crisis, ongoing wars, and the evolving political landscape. The 2008 election is a reminder of the power of innovation and the importance of adapting to new realities. It showed that in the digital age, the rules of the game have changed, and those who can harness the power of technology and data will have a significant advantage. As we look back on this election, we see not only the historic achievement of America's first Black president, but also the dawn of a new era in political campaigning. Next, we arrive at the 2016 election, a contest that shocked the world and marked a significant shift in American politics. The election saw the rise of populism, with Donald Trump, a businessman and reality TV star with no prior political experience, defeating former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in one of the most surprising outcomes in U.S. electoral history. The 2016 election wasn't just about the candidates. It was about a country grappling with deep divisions and a growing sense of disillusionment with the political establishment. The 2016 election took place against a backdrop of economic anxiety, cultural conflict, and widespread dissatisfaction with the status quo. Trump's campaign capitalized on these sentiments, presenting himself as an outsider who would drain the swamp and put America first. Clinton, on the other hand, represented continuity and experience, but struggled to overcome the perception that she was part of the establishment that many voters had grown to distrust. Social media played an even more significant role in the 2016 election than it had in 2008. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter became battlegrounds for political messaging, but they also became conduits for misinformation, fake news, and foreign interference. The spread of false information and the use of data-driven micro-targeting by both campaigns and by foreign actors had a profound impact on the election's outcome. Trump's campaign effectively used social media to bypass traditional news outlets and speak directly to voters. His tweets and posts were often controversial, but they kept him in the spotlight and allowed him to dominate the news cycle. Meanwhile, Clinton's campaign struggled to counter the barrage of negative stories and false narratives that spread rapidly online. The campaign trail in 2016 was marked by unprecedented levels of hostility and division. Trump's rallies often featured harsh rhetoric and attacks on the media, immigrants, and his political opponents. Clinton faced intense scrutiny over her use of a private email server during her tenure as Secretary of State, an issue that dogged her campaign and fueled doubts about her trustworthiness. The debates between Trump and Clinton were among the most watched in history, but they were also some of the most contentious. Trump's unconventional style and willingness to break political norms contrasted sharply with Clinton's more traditional approach. While Clinton was widely seen as the more polished debater, Trump's unorthodox tactics resonated with voters who were frustrated with the status quo. On election night, November 8, 2016, the world watched in shock as the results came in. Despite polling that had suggested a Clinton victory, Trump won key swing states like Florida, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, securing an electoral college victory with 304 votes to Clinton's tutored 27. Clinton won the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, but Trump's wins in crucial states gave him the presidency. The outcome of the 2016 election was a profound shock to the political establishment, both in the United States and around the world. It was a clear indication that the country was deeply divided and that many voters were fed up with the political status quo. Trump's victory also raised questions about the accuracy of polling, the role of the Electoral College, and the impact of social media and foreign interference on democratic processes. The election of 2016 had far-reaching consequences, both in the United States and internationally. Trump's presidency would go on to reshape American politics, challenging long-standing norms and policies, and sparking intense debates over issues like immigration, trade, and the role of the United States in the world. The 2016 election also underscored the deep divisions in American society, divisions that continue to influence the political landscape today. The rise of populism, the power of social media, and the impact of misinformation are all legacies of the 2016 election that continue to shape American democracy. The election of 2016 is a powerful reminder of the unpredictability of democracy and the importance of understanding the forces that drive political change. It showed that in a rapidly changing world, traditional political strategies are no longer sufficient, and it highlighted the need for new approaches to engage with voters and address their concerns. As we reflect on the 2016 election, we're reminded of the fragility of democratic institutions and the importance of vigilance in protecting them. It's a moment in history that will be studied and debated for years to come, as we continue to grapple with its implications for the future of American democracy. Finally, we arrive at the most recent and one of the most consequential elections in American history, the election of 2020. This was an election like no other, held in the midst of a global pandemic, marked by unprecedented levels of voter turnout and culminating in a bitterly contested result. The 2020 election was a test of American democracy, revealing deep divisions within the country and raising serious questions about the future of the republic. The election pitted the incumbent president, Donald Trump, against former Vice President Joe Biden. The stakes were incredibly high, with the country facing multiple crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic, an economic recession, racial unrest, and growing concerns about the integrity of the electoral process. Biden ran on a platform of restoring the soul of the nation and bringing the country together, while Trump focused on his record of economic growth and his America First policies. The COVID-19 pandemic had a profound impact on the 2020 election, affecting everything from campaign strategies to voting methods. With traditional campaign rallies and door-to-door canvassing severely restricted, both campaigns had to adapt to the new reality. Biden's campaign largely moved online, with virtual events and digital advertising taking the place of in-person gatherings. Trump, on the other hand, continued to hold large rallies, often defying public health guidelines. The pandemic also led to a dramatic increase in mail-in voting, as millions of Americans chose to vote by mail rather than risk exposure to the virus at polling places. This shift in voting methods became a major point of contention, with Trump repeatedly claiming, without evidence, that mail-in voting was prone to fraud. These claims set the stage for the post-election disputes that would follow. As in 2016, social media played a crucial role in the 2020 election, but this time the landscape was even more contentious. The spread of disinformation, conspiracy theories, and false claims about the election process reached new heights, fueled by the polarized political climate and the ease with which misinformation could spread online. Both campaigns used social media to rally their supporters, but the platforms also became battlegrounds for competing narratives about the legitimacy of the election. In the months leading up to the election, tech companies like Facebook and Twitter took steps to curb the spread of misinformation, including labeling false claims and suspending accounts that violated their policies. Despite these efforts, the sheer volume of disinformation and the deep-seated distrust in the electoral process made it difficult to maintain public confidence in the outcome. Election Day on November 3rd, 2020, was unlike any other in American history. With millions of votes cast by mail, the results were not immediately clear, and it took several days to count the ballots in key swing states. As the count continued, Biden gradually pulled ahead, ultimately winning 306 electoral votes to Trump's 232. Biden also won the popular vote by more than 7 million votes, securing the highest vote total in U.S. history. However, the results were hotly contested by Trump and his supporters, who launched a series of legal challenges and pushed baseless claims of widespread voter fraud. These efforts culminated in the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, as Congress met to certify the election results. The attack on the Capitol was a shocking and unprecedented event, highlighting the deep divisions within the country and the fragility of its democratic institutions. The 2020 election and its aftermath have had a profound impact on American democracy. Biden's victory marked the end of Trump's presidency, but the divisions exposed by the election have not healed. The events of January 6th led to Trump's second impeachment, but the country remains deeply polarized, with many Americans questioning the legitimacy of the election and the future of the democratic process. The 2020 election also raised important questions about the role of social media in democracy, the resilience of democratic institutions in the face of unprecedented challenges, and the importance of ensuring that every vote is counted and that the will of the people is respected. The election of 2020 is a stark reminder of the challenges facing American democracy in the 21st century. It showed that even the world's oldest democracy is not immune to the forces of division, disinformation, and distrust. As we look back on this election, we must consider what steps are needed to strengthen our democratic institutions, restore public confidence, and ensure that the democratic process remains fair, free, and accessible to all. The 2020 election will be remembered not just for its historic outcome, but for the lessons it offers about the importance of unity, resilience, and vigilance in preserving the democratic values that define the United States. Now that we've explored some of the most consequential elections in U.S. history, let's dive into one of the most controversial aspects of the American electoral system, the Electoral College. This institution has played a decisive role in many presidential elections, yet it remains one of the most misunderstood and debated components of the U.S. political process. The Electoral College was established by the framers of the Constitution as a compromise between electing the president by a vote in Congress and electing the president by a popular vote of qualified citizens. While it was designed to balance the influence of smaller states with that of larger ones, the Electoral College has, at times, led to outcomes that contradict the popular vote, sparking debates over its fairness and relevance in modern times. To understand the Electoral College, we must first look at its origins. The framers of the Constitution were concerned about direct democracy and the potential for mob rule. They feared that a direct popular vote could lead to the election of demagogues or candidates with only regional appeal. To mitigate these risks, they created the Electoral College as a buffer between the electorate and the presidency. The idea was to have a group of electors, men of wisdom and virtue, who would have the final say in choosing the president. Each state was allotted a number of electors equal to its total number of senators and representatives in Congress. This system was intended to give smaller states a proportionally greater influence in the election, ensuring that the president would have broad support across the country. Throughout U.S. history, the Electoral College has played a pivotal role in determining the outcome of several elections, sometimes in ways that have sparked controversy and debate. One of the earliest examples is the election of 1824, in which John Quincy Adams was elected president, despite losing both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote to Andrew Jackson. The decision was made by the House of Representatives after no candidate secured a majority in the Electoral College, leading to accusations of a corrupt bargain between Adams and Henry Clay. In more recent history, the elections of 2000 and 2016 have reignited debates over the Electoral College. In both cases, the winning candidate, George W. Bush in 2000 and Donald Trump in 2016, lost the popular vote but won the presidency through the Electoral College. These outcomes have led to calls for reform, with critics arguing that the Electoral College is undemocratic and undermines the principle of one person, one vote. The Electoral College has its defenders and detractors, each with compelling arguments. Supporters argue that the Electoral College protects the interests of smaller states and ensures that candidates must campaign across the entire country, rather than focusing solely on populous urban areas. They also contend that the Electoral College helps maintain political stability by producing clear winners and reducing the likelihood of contentious, nationwide recounts. Critics, however, argue that the Electoral College is an outdated relic of the 18th century that no longer serves its intended purpose. They point to the fact that it can, and has, led to presidents being elected without a majority of the popular vote, which they see as fundamentally undemocratic. They also argue that the system gives disproportionate power to swing states, while effectively disenfranchising voters in states that are solidly Democratic or Republican. Over the years, there have been numerous proposals to reform or abolish the Electoral College. Some advocates have called for a direct popular vote to determine the president, arguing that this would be the fairest and most democratic method. Others have suggested more modest reforms, such as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, in which states would pledge their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, regardless of the outcome in their own state. Despite these efforts, significant reform has proven difficult. The Electoral College is enshrined in the Constitution, and any change would require a constitutional amendment, a process that is both politically challenging and time-consuming. Moreover, many smaller states are reluctant to give up the disproportionate influence they currently enjoy under the Electoral College system. The Electoral College remains one of the most contentious aspects of American democracy. While it was designed to balance the interests of different states and prevent the rise of demagogues, its role in modern elections has led to significant debate about its fairness and relevance. As we reflect on the history and future of the Electoral College, we must consider the fundamental question of how best to reconcile the principles of federalism and democracy in a diverse and rapidly changing nation. Whether the Electoral College will continue to shape American elections in its current form or be reformed in the years to come remains an open question. What is clear, however, is that this institution will continue to be a focal point of discussion and debate in the ongoing effort to perfect the American democratic system. As we approach the conclusion of our deep dive into U.S. election history, let's take a moment to reflect on some of the key milestones and turning points that have shaped the American electoral process. These moments, both big and small, have had a lasting impact on the way elections are conducted and how the American people engage with their democracy. From the first peaceful transfer of power in 1800 to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, these milestones remind us of the resilience of American democracy and the ongoing struggle to make it more inclusive and representative of all citizens. The election of 1800, often referred to as the Revolution of 1800, was a pivotal moment in American history. It marked the first peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another, as Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, defeated the incumbent president, John Adams, a Federalist. This election set a precedent for the peaceful transition of power, a cornerstone of American democracy. The election was fiercely contested and ended in an electoral tie between Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, throwing the decision to the House of Representatives. After 36 ballots, Jefferson was finally chosen as president, and the peaceful resolution of this crisis helped establish the legitimacy and stability of the young republic's electoral system. The election of 1864 took place in the midst of the Civil War, with the very future of the United States at stake. President Abraham Lincoln faced a difficult re-election campaign against his former top general, George McClellan. The war had taken a heavy toll on the nation, and there was widespread doubt about whether Lincoln could secure a second term. Lincoln's re-election was far from assured, but key Union victories in the months leading up to the election helped bolster his chances. Ultimately, Lincoln won a decisive victory, securing his mandate to continue the war effort and pursue his vision of reunifying the nation. The 1864 election was a testament to the resilience of American democracy, even in the face of existential threats. The election of 1920 was another milestone in U.S. history, as it was the first in which women had the right to vote nationwide following the ratification of the 19th Amendment. This election marked a significant expansion of the electorate and a major step forward in the struggle for gender equality. The election resulted in a landslide victory for Warren G. Harding, a Republican who campaigned on a return to normalcy after the upheavals of World War I. While Harding's presidency is often remembered for its scandals, the 1920 election remains a significant moment in the history of American democracy, as millions of women exercised their right to vote for the first time. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a landmark piece of legislation that fundamentally changed the American electoral landscape. Passed in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement and the Selma to Montgomery marches, the act aimed to eliminate racial discrimination in voting, particularly in the South. The Voting Rights Act banned literacy tests and other discriminatory practices that had been used to disenfranchise African American voters. It also provided for federal oversight of elections in areas with a history of discrimination. The passage of this act was a major victory for civil rights activists and a significant step towards making American democracy more inclusive. The election of 2000 was one of the closest and most contentious in U.S. history. The outcome hinged on the state of Florida, where a razor-thin margin led to a prolonged legal battle over the recount process. The dispute ultimately reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which, in a controversial decision, halted the recount and effectively awarded the presidency to George W. Bush. The 2000 election raised important questions about the integrity of the electoral process, the role of the judiciary in deciding elections, and the need for electoral reform. It also highlighted the importance of every vote, as the final outcome was determined by just a few hundred votes in a single state. These milestones in U.S. electoral history serve as reminders of the challenges and triumphs that have shaped the American democratic process. Each of these moments has left a lasting legacy, influencing the way elections are conducted and the way citizens engage with their democracy. As we continue to navigate the complexities of modern elections, it's important to remember the lessons of the past and to work towards a more inclusive, fair, and resilient democratic system. In the American political landscape, two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, have dominated the electoral process for well over a century. However, third parties have played a significant, if often overlooked, role in U.S. elections. These parties, ranging from the Progressive Party of the early 20th century to more recent examples like the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, have influenced national debates, shaped policy agendas, and even altered the outcomes of key elections. While third parties rarely win major elections, their impact can be felt in various ways, from pushing major parties to adopt new policies to drawing attention to issues that might otherwise be ignored. In this segment, we'll explore the history of third parties in the U.S., their successes and challenges, and the ways in which they have shaped American democracy. Third parties have been a part of the American political system since the early days of the Republic. The Anti-Masonic Party, founded in the 1820s, was one of the first significant third parties, and it played a role in shaping the political landscape of its time. However, it wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that third parties began to have a more substantial impact on national politics. The Populist Party, founded in the 1890s, is one of the most notable examples. Representing the interests of farmers and laborers, the Populist Party pushed for reforms like the direct election of senators and the establishment of a graduated income tax, both of which were eventually adopted by the major parties. The Progressive Party, led by former President Theodore Roosevelt in 1912, also had a significant influence, promoting a wide range of progressive reforms and drawing enough votes to split the Republican Party, ultimately helping Woodrow Wilson win the presidency. The 1912 election stands out as one of the most successful moments for a third party in U.S. history. After losing the Republican nomination to William Howard Taft, former President Theodore Roosevelt ran as the candidate of the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party. Roosevelt's campaign was based on a platform of progressive reforms, including women's suffrage, social insurance programs, and the regulation of big business. Roosevelt's third-party candidacy split the Republican vote, allowing Democrat Woodrow Wilson to win the presidency with just 42% of the popular vote. Despite losing the election, Roosevelt's campaign demonstrated the potential for third parties to influence national politics by introducing new ideas and shifting the political debate. The Progressive Party's platform laid the groundwork for many of the reforms that would later be adopted during the New Deal era. In more recent history, third parties have continued to play a role in U.S. elections, though their influence has often been more subtle. The most prominent example in modern times is the 2000 election, in which Ralph Nader, running as the candidate of the Green Party, was accused of drawing votes away from Democrat Al Gore in key states like Florida. The razor-thin margin in Florida ultimately decided the election in favor of George W. Bush, leading to intense debate over the role of third parties in close races. The Libertarian Party, which advocates for limited government and individual liberties, has also been a consistent presence in U.S. elections, though it has yet to achieve significant electoral success at the national level. However, the party has influenced the political debate on issues like taxation, civil liberties, and government regulation, pushing these topics onto the agenda of the major parties. Despite their occasional successes, third parties in the U.S. face significant challenges. The American electoral system, with its winner-take-all structure and first-past-the-post voting, makes it difficult for third parties to win elections. Unlike in parliamentary systems, where proportional representation allows smaller parties to gain seats based on their share of the vote, the U.S. system tends to favor the two major parties, which can secure a plurality of votes in each district. In addition to these structural barriers, third parties often struggle with limited resources and media coverage, making it difficult for them to compete with the well-funded and well-established major parties. Moreover, voters who might sympathize with third-party platforms often hesitate to support them, fearing that their vote will be wasted or that it will inadvertently help elect the candidate they oppose the most. Looking ahead, the future of third parties in the U.S. remains uncertain. Some argue that the rise of political polarization and dissatisfaction with the two major parties could create opportunities for third parties to gain traction. Others believe that significant electoral reforms, such as ranked choice voting or proportional representation, would be necessary to give third parties a fair chance at competing in national elections. Despite these challenges, third parties will likely continue to play a role in American politics, whether by influencing the platforms of the major parties, introducing new ideas into the political discourse, or serving as a vehicle for protest votes. As long as there are voters who feel unrepresented by the two-party system, there will be a place for third parties in the U.S. electoral landscape. The role of third parties in U.S. elections is a testament to the diversity of political thought in the American electorate. While they may not always win, third parties serve an important function in the democratic process by challenging the status quo, advocating for alternative policies, and representing the interests of those who feel marginalized by the major parties. As we reflect on the history and impact of third parties, we must recognize their contributions to the evolution of American democracy. They remind us that political change often comes from the fringes, and that the ideas of today's third parties could become the mainstream policies of tomorrow. Campaigning for office has always been a crucial aspect of U.S. elections, but the strategies and tactics used by candidates have evolved dramatically over time. From the early days of whistle-stop tours and handshaking to the modern era of social media and targeted digital advertising, campaign strategies have continuously adapted to new technologies, changing voter behaviors and the demands of the political landscape. In this segment, we'll explore the evolution of campaign strategies in U.S. elections, highlighting the key innovations that have shaped the way candidates connect with voters and win elections. We'll also discuss how these changes have influenced the democratic process, for better or worse. In the early years of the Republic, campaigning was a much more personal and localized affair. Candidates often traveled by train or carriage, making whistle-stop tours across the country to meet voters face-to-face. These tours were characterized by speeches delivered from the back of a train or in town squares, where candidates would address crowds and shake hands with potential supporters. The focus was on building personal relationships with voters and establishing a sense of trust and familiarity. This approach was particularly important in an era when mass communication was limited and candidates had to rely on word of mouth, local newspapers, and personal interactions to spread their message. The advent of mass media in the 20th century brought about a significant shift in campaign strategies. Radio was the first medium to revolutionize campaigning, allowing candidates to reach millions of voters simultaneously. Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats during the 1930s are a prime example of how radio was used to communicate directly with the American people, fostering a sense of connection and trust. The introduction of television in the 1950s further transformed campaigning, as candidates could now appeal to voters through both sound and visuals. The first televised presidential debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in 1960 is often cited as a turning point in campaign strategy. Kennedy's telegenic appearance and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Nixon's haggard look, leading many to conclude that television had played a decisive role in Kennedy's victory. Television also gave rise to the era of the campaign ad, where candidates could craft carefully scripted messages and deliver them directly into voters' living rooms. These ads became a staple of modern campaigns, allowing candidates to shape their public image and attack their opponents in ways that were not possible in the pre-television era. The rise of the internet and social media in the 21st century has brought about another seismic shift in campaign strategies. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram have become essential tools for modern campaigns, allowing candidates to reach voters directly, engage with them in real time, and build online communities of supporters. Barack Obama's 2008 campaign is often credited with pioneering the use of social media in presidential elections. Obama's team used platforms like Facebook to mobilize young voters, organize grassroots events, and fundraise through small online donations. The campaign's success demonstrated the power of digital organizing and set the stage for future campaigns to leverage social media in even more sophisticated ways. In addition to social media, modern campaigns have increasingly relied on data-driven strategies to target voters more precisely. By analyzing vast amounts of data on voter behavior, preferences, and demographics, campaigns can tailor their messages to specific audiences, maximizing their chances of winning key constituencies. This approach, while highly effective, has also raised concerns about privacy, manipulation, and the erosion of public trust in the democratic process. The evolution of campaign strategies has had profound implications for American democracy. On the one hand, these innovations have made it easier for candidates to reach and engage with voters, increasing political participation and awareness. On the other hand, the focus on media-driven campaigns and data analytics has led to a more superficial and polarized political environment, where candidates are often more concerned with image and sound bites than with substantive policy debates. Moreover, the reliance on social media and targeted advertising has contributed to the spread of misinformation and the fragmentation of the public sphere. As campaigns increasingly cater to niche audiences, the shared national conversation that once characterized U.S. elections has given way to echo chambers and filter bubbles, where voters are exposed only to information that reinforces their pre-existing beliefs. As we look to the future, it's clear that campaign strategies will continue to evolve in response to new technologies and changing voter behaviors. The use of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and other emerging technologies could further transform the way candidates connect with voters and win elections. However, these developments also raise important questions about the future of democracy. How can we ensure that new campaign strategies promote informed and meaningful political participation rather than simply manipulating voters for short-term gains? What role should government and civil society play in regulating the use of new technologies in campaigns to protect the integrity of the electoral process? As we grapple with these questions, it's essential to remember that the ultimate goal of any campaign strategy should be to engage voters in a meaningful way, to foster a healthy and vibrant democracy, and to ensure that the voices of all citizens are heard in the political process. The evolution of campaign strategies in U.S. elections reflects the broader changes in American society, from the rise of mass media to the digital revolution. While these innovations have brought new opportunities for engagement, they have also introduced new challenges and risks. As we move forward, it's crucial to strike a balance between embracing new technologies and preserving the core values of democracy. By doing so, we can ensure that future elections continue to reflect the will of the people and that the democratic process remains fair, transparent, and inclusive. Voter participation is the cornerstone of any democracy, and the U.S. is no exception. However, the history of voter participation in the United States is complex, marked by periods of both expansion and restriction. From the early days of the Republic, when voting rights were limited to white male property owners, to the modern era, where efforts to expand voter access coexist with new challenges to voting rights, the landscape of voter participation has been in constant flux. In this segment, we'll explore the changing landscape of voter participation in the U.S., examining the key milestones in the expansion of voting rights, the challenges that have arisen, and the ongoing efforts to ensure that all citizens have the opportunity to participate in the democratic process. The expansion of voting rights in the United States has been a long and often contentious process. In the early years of the Republic, the right to vote was restricted to white male property owners, excluding large segments of the population, including women, African Americans, and Native Americans. Over time, however, the struggle for suffrage led to significant changes in the law and the Constitution. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, was a major milestone, prohibiting states from denying the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, the implementation of this amendment was undermined by Jim Crow laws in the South, which effectively disenfranchised African Americans for nearly a century through mechanisms like literacy tests, poll taxes, and outright violence. The women's suffrage movement, which gained momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. This was another significant step towards a more inclusive democracy, though it would take decades more to fully realize the promise of universal suffrage. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s brought renewed attention to the issue of voting rights, particularly in the South, where African Americans faced widespread disenfranchisement. The movement's efforts culminated in the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the most significant pieces of civil rights legislation in U.S. history. The Voting Rights Act aimed to eliminate the barriers that had prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote, such as literacy tests and other discriminatory practices. The act also provided for federal oversight of elections in states with a history of voter suppression, ensuring that changes to voting laws would not disproportionately affect minority voters. The passage of the Voting Rights Act marked a turning point in the struggle for voting rights, leading to a significant increase in voter registration and participation among African Americans. However, the fight for voting rights was far from over, as new challenges and efforts to restrict access to the ballot box would continue to emerge. In recent years, the issue of voter participation has once again come to the forefront of American politics, as new challenges have emerged that threaten to undermine the progress made over the past century. These challenges include voter ID laws, purges of voter rolls, gerrymandering, and restrictions on early and absentee voting. Proponents of these measures argue that they are necessary to prevent voter fraud and ensure the integrity of elections. However, critics contend that these measures disproportionately affect minority, low-income, and young voters, effectively disenfranchising them and undermining the democratic process. The 2013 Supreme Court decision in Shelby County Holder, which struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, has also had a significant impact on voter participation. Without the federal oversight provided by the Act, several states have implemented new voting restrictions that have been criticized for disproportionately affecting minority voters. Despite these challenges, there are ongoing efforts to expand voter participation and ensure that all citizens have the opportunity to vote. These efforts include initiatives to make voting more accessible, such as automatic voter registration, same-day registration, and expanded early voting. Advocacy groups are also working to combat voter suppression and protect the rights of disenfranchised communities. The use of technology to facilitate voting has also gained attention, with some states exploring options like online voter registration and secure electronic voting systems. However, these innovations also raise concerns about security, privacy, and the potential for hacking and other forms of electoral interference. Voter participation is essential to the functioning of a democracy. When citizens participate in the electoral process, they have the opportunity to shape the direction of their government and hold their elected officials accountable. High voter turnout is often seen as a sign of a healthy democracy, where citizens are engaged and invested in the political process. However, When significant portions of the population are disenfranchised or choose not to participate, the legitimacy of the democratic process can be called into question. Ensuring that all citizens have the opportunity to vote and that their votes are counted fairly is crucial to maintaining the integrity of U.S. elections and the democratic system as a whole. The history of voter participation in the United States is a story of progress and setbacks, of struggles and victories. As we continue to grapple with the challenges of modern elections, it's important to remember the hard-fought battles that have led to the expansion of voting rights and to remain vigilant in the face of new threats to voter participation. By working to ensure that all citizens have the opportunity to participate in the democratic process, we can help build a more inclusive and representative democracy where the voices of all Americans are heard and respected. As we wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating history and evolving landscape of U.S. elections, it's clear that the story of American democracy is one of constant change, challenge, and resilience. From the early days of the Republic to the digital age, the ways in which we choose our leaders and participate in the democratic process have continually evolved, reflecting the broader shifts in society. We've explored the groundbreaking moments, the controversies, and the innovations that have shaped U.S. elections, and we've seen how each election is a reflection of the times in which it occurs. But most importantly, we've highlighted the enduring importance of voter participation and the role each of us plays in shaping the future of our democracy. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. I hope you found today's discussion as enlightening and engaging as I did. Remember, the story of democracy is still being written, and each of us has a role to play in it. Be sure to tune in next time as we explore another fascinating topic, one that will offer new insights, provoke thought, and I hope spark a deeper understanding of the world around us. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you on the next episode of our journey into history. Take care and see you soon.